Hello and welcome to the Human Frequency. With property prices spiraling out of control, tiny houses have once again taken the interest of people who've been priced out of normal-sized homes. We're going to talk about tiny houses today, and it's not a disparaging thing. I actually like tiny houses. I think they're very cute. I think it's a great idea for people who want a tiny space and not have to deal with much stuff. The problem is that the market is out of control, so even tiny houses are priced now what a regular house should cost. We want to talk about why this is an issue and why nobody should be buying into the idea that they can't afford a home. We just need to wait for things to become normal again.
Yeah, this is the problem with trendiness, is that as stuff gets popular, the price goes up. I've seen this happen with many things before, not just housing, but it's really a problem for everyday people who are working hard, the people who are working hard, that are just trying to get by, and they should have a house, but they can't get one right now.
And it's ridiculous because anybody who's working is not poor. Anybody who's making money is not poor. And we're told over and over and over again that if we don't earn six figures and have that kind of job, if we do some kind of service job or something that actually benefits people or that actually has a use in society, you know, besides being a lawyer or, no offense, but, you know, a doctor, because a lot of doctors are just, I know my doctor was just taking my money and doing nothing for me for years. So we're told we have to get these kinds of jobs. We can't just do what we love. We can't do something that serves people or that just has a use in society. And that if we do that kind of job, we're poor. That's ridiculous. Everybody should be able to have a house, and people should not have to be forced to rent. Not that there's anything wrong with renting. We rent. But if somebody is qualified and makes money, they should be able to have a house.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. So how did this happen again? I mean, this was happening 15 years ago.
It's the property boom, just like it was before. Here's an example. In our neighborhood, there are a couple of houses that are for sale for $300,000. And I looked at both of these houses and I said, this is ridiculous. I know that they paid $140,000. And I said that for both of them. Both of them paid $140,000. One of them in 2013 and one in 2016. Now, how did a house in 3 to 6 years more than double in value? The answer is it didn't. This is a manipulated market. Now, 10 years ago this happened, and it was very exciting for people who had property, but then we all saw it completely collapse, and anybody who was still in it at that point lost money if they got in when it was high. And I used to really love urban living. I don't anymore. It's kind of because of these property booms, because of the homogenization of every city, Agenda 21, the building of condos, which is part of the property boom. It's all connected. Cities have become uninhabitable to me. I can't stand it anymore. But I used to love urban living and the idea of small space because in itself, these are not bad things. The idea of having conveniences that you can walk to and not burn fuel, that's a good idea. Having just what you need in life and not, you know, burdening yourself with possessions, because that's what it is a good idea. A simple life is a good idea. And that used to be something you could accomplish in the city, but not anymore. So I did actually really like city living at that time. So what this comes down to is this show is not about saying this kind of housing is good, this kind of housing is bad. It's saying that everyone should be able to afford housing, whatever kind they like, and in whatever location they like. And if they're working, that should not be an issue.
Well, as we discussed in the last show, you're a little bit older than me, so you kind of have more of a handle on what it was like in the 90s when you could really live that kind of lifestyle that you wanted to, where you were working a little bit, but not too much where it was killing you, and you could pursue your passion in life and still have an apartment that didn't cost an arm and a leg.
Back then, in 1998, that's when I moved to an apartment in Silver Lake, which is a very, very trendy neighborhood in LA now. And I lived there from 1994 to 2001. And it's because of people like me, artistic types, that lived on almost nothing. And, you know, I worked 20 hours a week and did my music and my art. And that's what I did back then. That can't happen anymore, but because of people like me, the neighborhood gets a reputation for being artistic, and then all the wannabes move in. And by 2001, I couldn't be there anymore. And so just imagine what it's like today, now that it's as expensive as everywhere else in LA. There's nowhere for people who want to pursue their passion anymore in the city. That's why people like us are getting out of the city.
Yeah.
But 20 years ago, you could live tiny in LA for very, very little money, and that should be the point of living tiny. A tiny house or a tiny apartment should be cheap. Back then, you could get a studio apartment in the building I lived in for $350 a month, and the one bedrooms were $450 a month. And anyone could afford that, and it was a safe place to live. It was kind of dilapidated, but it was fine. Things got fixed when they broke. You had an apartment for a third of what you made in the month, even working part-time. Just imagine what you could do with your time and energy.
Well, yeah, you had options, and you didn't have this layer of stress hanging over you all the time, thinking, oh my God, how am I going to afford things? How am I going to pay the rent this month? All these bills are piling up. I'm going to have to get a second job or a third job.
Yeah, and back then, gas was $1.50 a gallon, too.
But you see what happens here is that these problems snowball for people, and then they suddenly can't live their lives anymore. And now, when I got my first apartment, it was 2005. Now, granted, I was sharing with two people, and I had my own room. I was sharing one bathroom with one of the guys, but I had my own room, and I paid $325 a month plus utilities. And when you're 20 years old in 2005, that's like amazing that you can even come across
That's
that.
An amazing deal.
Now, granted, it was the valley, and the apartments in the valley are not exactly high quality, but it was a situation where one guy had the apartment since about 1997. So he was in there, and these apartments are rent controlled. So the rent was only going up by 3 to 5% each year, depending on what it was. But that's a very small amount. And because of that, you're able to get really cheap rent in a place like that when it's being split 3 ways, especially so. So that was a good situation for me. And I was in there for just shy of 4 years. By the time I moved out, my rent was about $360 a month plus utilities. So to give you a perspective on how affordable that is, it really didn't go up much at all. And of course, being the slacker that I was at the time, I was still barely able to afford it.
Well, that's how we all were. I mean,
right.
That's how we all were. But let's fast forward, though, to what they're doing now in LA for people who are in your situation at that time. You were able to get a place for $325 and have your own bath, your own room. It was private. You had some privacy.
Not my own bath.
A shared bath with one guy.
Right.
Which is reasonable, because I'm about to tell you something very unreasonable. Last week, there was an ABC 7 report about something called pod sharing. This is a new way of living in LA, and I know this is because so many people are moving to LA because they want to become famous. I'm just confused as to why anyone would voluntarily move to LA.
Yeah,
That's where I grew up. I was
just going
forced
to
to
blurt
be there.
out in a very irritated fashion, why are you moving to LA?
I know, well, there's nothing there. I grew up there. It's you know what? I'm going to use nice language. It's a hellhole. Nice. Just a nice
positive, uplifting
euphemism for what it's really like there. So let's get real. You can have an oasis in LA, or you could back when you could find little pockets, of serenity. But nowadays it's completely overrun. It's completely out of control, and people are moving there. I don't know why. So pod sharing is the solution to low income housing in LA. It costs $1,000 a month, and you basically live in a drawer. You live in a bunk, and you're sharing a tiny space with several other people, but your bunk has its own TV with whatever they're doing now. I don't know, Amazon Fire or something, or you know what they do now, Roku. I don't know what these things are, but people have these TVs.
No, Sharon, I don't know what they do.
I come from another dimension, so I don't watch that kind of television. But that's what they have. You get your own bunk, you have the television, you get the Wi-Fi, you're surrounded by all kinds of people from other countries and states, like a youth hostel. You share a bath, you share the laundry, you get all this stuff, but it's $1,000 a month to live in a drawer and have no privacy.
Not to mention
can't
the
understand why
smells.
someone would do that.
And the smells of these people must be
let's not assume
overpowering.
that they all smell, but yes, fragrances are a problem. Yes, people not bathing can be a problem. They do have bathrooms at the pod share. You do share them. And you have a tiny locker for your valuables. That's it. You don't have any private space. You get this tiny locker for anything of value. And everything is shared. You have no walls. See, at least you had a room back then. And the other thing about the pod share is, for people who are sensitive, it is an EMF nightmare. There's one of these smart TVs on every bunk. Everyone's got a smartphone. There's the Wi-Fi. And you're going to be around a bunch of zapped out 25-year-olds who just got off the boat in LA and all they want to do is party.
God help us.
It's not a good situation. And it's interesting because in this report, the girl or supposed girl that was doing the
That's a whole other
explanation of the pod share, she was talking about how she wanted to move to Hollywood and Vine in the year 2012 and how there was nothing affordable. And I lived 1 mile south of Hollywood and Vine in 2012, and I had a 1-bedroom freestanding bungalow with a back patio that was rent controlled, and it was a fixer that I fixed up. It only took me a week or two to just paint it and clean it up, but it was actually livable, and I kind of just added stuff here and there. $825 a month. That's a good deal. I mean, even today, even then is what I mean. That was at the bottom of the market.
Well, concerning this pod share, you said you live in a drawer, and I just want to be clear here. You literally, it's like that Seinfeld episode where the Japanese TV executives are in these literally in drawers.
They're not TV executives, they're tourists. Kramer put them in drawers.
Okay, well, I'm confused because there are TV
executives. He took all their money to buy cowboy hats.
I'm confused because there are TV executives in there who are, they're given the oranges. Anyway, it's a whole other thing. But they're literally in this set of drawers, and he pushes them into the cabinet. This is what this pod share situation.
It's not really a drawer, but it's like a bunk bed. But that's your whole space is a bunk.
But you're confined to this little cubicle.
No. You're not confined. You can go sit at the table with a bunch of other strangers. You can communicate with people about mindless stuff like umami burger, in a group setting.
Yeah, that sounds really fun.
Well, anyway, that's what LA has become. It's pathetic. So I just wanted to give a little backstory on that because now the tiny house, which started to become trendy about 10 years ago, is really coming up into the forefront again in media. And the tiny houses, a lot of these ones are trailers of about 100 to 200 square feet. I would say that's a way better living situation than the pod share. But the issue is what you're paying for it. These are mobile homes. So that's another thing we got to consider. A lot of the tiny houses are mobile homes. A mobile home shouldn't be affected by the market. This should be a solution for low-income people or artists or people who don't want to work slave jobs. You should be able to get a tiny house of that size. I don't see why it would cost more than $10,000, $5,000 to $10,000. Think about what a trailer costs that you attach to a truck. It doesn't look trendy. It doesn't have that cute little shape, but it costs way less than a tiny house.
It should be a solution. That's the key. But instead, it's just being turned into another trap, another money pit.
And it's very trendy. And I actually have a book on tiny houses because I really was into tiny houses. I still am. I think they're so cute. And I think it's such a great idea. It's just the pricing is out of control with these. But this book I have on tiny houses came out in 2009. But back then, the definition of a tiny house was different than today. Most of the ones in the book are about 500 square feet, which is a very comfortable living space for two people who want to be economical. Gabe and I lived in 500 square feet from 2011 to 2015 together, and it was totally fine. It totally worked. It was a little under. It was like 480. It was fine.
Yeah. It was not a problem because, well, one thing to consider is that we didn't have our organite shop back then, so we didn't need an office space. We had other jobs outside of the house.
But now we could live in a house just barely bigger than that.
Right.
Because we are efficient with space. But here's the problem. If people want to have children, and everybody deserves to have a family, if all you have available to you in your budget is a tiny house, How can you raise a family in that? We have to understand that different people have different needs. So when we're told there's so much scarcity of lumber and resources and we all need to cram together into cities, into tiny places, it's not true. That might work for a young single person, but it doesn't necessarily work for a family. So there's no reason why, we shouldn't. Let's change the definition of the tiny house back to what it was 10 years ago. In this tiny house book, the biggest ones are 1,100 square feet. That's adequate for a family. So
Absolutely.
let's just get real about what these tiny houses are. I think that what's really behind this, and this is why we're talking about it, is it's programming for poverty and scarcity.
It is. And not to mention what that sort of thing does to your morale. And thinking about your past, like you and I are thinking about our past living situations, and now years later, it appears that we can only afford to live in 200 square feet or something like that.
It doesn't make sense because we're more established now. 20 years ago, I was kind of a loser. I mean, I just, worked part-time and was in a rock band, and it was fine for the age I was back then. And I didn't earn much money, but it didn't matter back then. But I'm established now. I'm middle-aged. I have, I have my work that I do, my research, and I have a livelihood that can afford to live a little better than I lived at 22. I do different things with my life. I'm productive now. Because I'm productive, I should be able to live better than I lived when I was in my early 20s. But the crazy part about it is I can't live as well as I lived back then in LA. What happened in 20 years that I was young and just starting out and could live fine, and now I'm established and middle-aged and I can't live there? That's a problem. So it's all an artificial market. The pricing of houses, we've talked about this before, it has nothing to do with reality. There's no reason why our neighbor's house 6 years ago was one price and today it's more than double that price, and all they did was sit in it and live there. There's no reason for it. So it's nonsense. The real estate market is absolute nonsense. And this poverty and scarcity programming is that no matter how hard you work, there isn't enough for everybody, which isn't true. This world has everything we need.
It's all a lie.
It's all abundance, But the poverty programming is no matter how hard you work, you're going to have to live tiny, and you're just going to have to struggle and make ends meet. The tiny house people are appealing to two types. And I'm talking about the propaganda artists. I'm not talking about people who just like small living. I'm talking about the ones who are jacking up the prices of these things so that regular people can't get them anymore. And one, they target low-income people because it's hard to afford a place. But low income nowadays has a really strange meaning. Let me give an example. To get a discount on electricity, which, by the way, saves you on that smart meter opt-out fee. For people who ask me about that, which I get questions on, they do have low-income discounts for electricity. And they call it the CARE program in California. And you know what they call low income? For one person, it's around in the low 30,000 range. So in my opinion, one person making 30,000, that's not hard to live on, or it shouldn't be. But now that's what they're calling low income. So, by the way, the plus side of this is it makes it a lot cheaper to opt out of the smart meter. Sign up for that thing.
Yeah.
But my point being that that's not low income, that's an income. That should pay for everything. There should be no problem there. Just everything's overpriced and the incomes haven't gone up to reflect inflation.
That's true. Inflation, I was actually just going to mention, inflation is the other element here, is that the dollar isn't worth anything anymore. And that's how they're stealing from people, is through their labor, is that they're forcing people to accept less for their labor. They're still putting the same amount of work in, but just not being compensated enough for it.
That's true. And so this tiny house trend is going to appeal to people who work but can't afford something. And the other type of people that it appeals to is they can get rich people in on it by appealing to their sense of greed. People who already have property, they'll put a tiny house on their property and charge high rent for it. Or they'll turn their garage into a tiny house and charge high rent. And this actually causes a huge problem. These tiny house, back house landlords, they're psycho. I just have to add that here. If you've lived in LA and tried to do the back house situation, you're going to end up with a psychopath living in the front house, and they're going to make your life a living hell. So if there is a tiny house on the premises with a landlord, do not rent it. Stay away. That's just a little word of advice from having made the same mistake several times myself. But yeah, there's this whole game about you've got the property already, put something on it and charge people rent on it. Start, getting more money out of that property. And also they appeal to people wanting a second home, and that's kind of like they want to do glamping. They don't want to just camp. They want to glamp. I hate that word.
I hate it too.
Glamorous camping. Glamorous camping. So, tiny houses as a second home is a kind of a different situation than people who just need a place to live.
Yeah, let's focus on the people who need one home and just want to get that one home. And yeah, again, this is presenting an incorrect view of what normal human life is like.
This is also tied in with the whole Airbnb racket. We've talked about this in the past. We talk about real estate a lot because it's an interest of mine. I used to have properties. I took loans for them, but I used to have properties up in Oregon. And I really was good at it. I mean, I'm really good at fixing them, and I really love houses and buildings. I like restoring vintage stuff. So to me, property is very interesting. And I keep up with it and I look at it. But for somebody, why is somebody qualified at this unable to do it? That's the world we live in now. Mm-hmm. The landlords are all completely unqualified. They all take bank loans, by the way. No one owns their property. No one can own anything anyway. But the
even
point
still,
being,
most of these people who think that they own, they're just renting from the banks. So it's not really ownership. You're just kind of holding it for someone else.
So I want to point out the Airbnb aspect to the property boom and how it contributes to this racket. People are buying places they can't afford an Airbnb a room, so they're like justifying it. Oh, I can afford it now because I'm going to earn this much off the room. You lose your privacy. It's not a real home anymore. It becomes a hotel. You don't know who you're getting. I know people who have done Airbnb and had all kind of nightmare stories about the people coming through. So that's one thing, but Airbnb makes a ton of money off this, because they take a fee for every transaction, and this is going on thousands of homes every day, and all they have to do is keep their website running. That's all they have to do, and they collect the fee. So that's a big scam on people, and they think they can just get a house and Airbnb a room. And the other thing is that, of course, again, the back house landlord wants to just get extra money. Who is getting targeted here? Who is getting hit the worst? It's the millennials, the most productive generation currently. The millennials are working people. They're established. They're having kids. These are people of prime working age, not just starting out in McDonald's, but working professional jobs and having families. These are the ones that are being targeted. It's a crime to target innocent families.
It is. And these property booms, they bring out the worst in people. It's inevitable.
And you know what this is doing? This is just, what this is? It's socialism. It's the evening out of everything. They can't do it the same way in the United States that they do it in other countries. They got to do it different here. All of the first world countries are having these property booms. They're all suffering the same problem. Mm-hmm. And this is going to destroy productivity because people are working their asses off. And they're putting everything into these houses, and then they're going to lose it all because it's going to crash. This is terrible for people who have worked hard. That's what I'm saying. And this is really a target on the youngest generation.
It is, and I feel like we talk about this all the time.
Yeah, we do.
It's such a huge problem because of who always gets it in the end. It's always the people who deserve to have the things that they seek in life, the things that they need. This isn't like people trying to attain these lofty goals. It's a basic necessity. Right. It's a home. It's not a luxury item. I know we've said this 100 times before, but I'm going to say it again. So there's something has to be done.
Well, what has to be done is we have to stop fueling it. We talked about this before. You cannot take these home loans. If you can't afford a house, this is against God's law, by the way. Usury. This is totally against the law of God, the law of the universe. To loan someone money and then take interest on it. This has fueled a market that's completely fraudulent. The houses are priced all based on people getting loans. If people stopped taking loans, that whole thing would fall apart. That's why this video is going to get so suppressed. You're going to see like 150 views on it, even if 1,000 people listen to it. Because I just said why they're doing this, because it's all about the loans, and taking a loan, you're contributing to the whole problem.
Now I know the definition of usury gets watered down in modern times. People think it means usury means charging excessive interest on a loan.
Any interest.
No, it's any. There should not be any loans. If you can't afford something, whether it's a house or a car or a bag of potato chips, you don't buy it, period.
Well, speaking of loans, I want to talk about a video I saw on YouTube about this really opulent house in Silver Lake. That's the neighborhood I lived in 20 years ago. This channel is called Kirsten Dirksen, and a friend of ours showed us this channel because he's into desert living and living within your means and homesteading and cool stuff like that. So he showed us this channel because there was a Joshua Tree house on it, which actually we'll talk about in a minute. But this channel, Kirsten Dirksen, I call her Dirk Kirstensen because if this one was born a woman, then I was born a garden snail. But that is what I'm talking about. So I don't want to get into the whole transgender thing. I'm not against people doing whatever they do or whatever they want to do. But I'm saying when a transgender individual is used to promote something in the media, that's a red flag, a huge red flag. And it's not just on mainstream TV. It's on these YouTube channels, which are indie channels made to look, they're mainstream channels made to look indie. They have a budget. There's a huge budget behind these channels, but it's looking like this lady's just traveling around the world.
It's exactly like the music that has this polished look. It's portrayed as independent, but it's as mainstream as all the rest.
Right. So this is portrayed as this lady's just interested in these off-grid houses and alternate ways of living and traveling around the world to do it. Anyway, it was a red flag to me because the second our friend showed us the channel, I took one look at him and I was like, okay, well, we've got a, Illuminati transgender clone is what it is. They're not really like us. It's not like a human being who wants to become a different sex. It's not even a human to begin with. But they're promoting the idea of tiny houses and all this off-grid stuff. So what's this all about? What's the agenda here? Because if that's how they're doing it, then this is proof to me that there's something behind the tiny houses besides affordability. There's some kind of training and programming here, or it wouldn't be trendy. And there was this house on the show that I had to watch because it was in my old neighborhood. And it said that this guy was built a Silver Lake house on a modest salary. And there was nothing modest about this house. The guy actually had to go deep into debt to do this. He had to get a construction loan. He said he had $80,000 of credit card debt by the time it was done, in addition to friends and family loans. It's sounding to me like he got a loan for at least $500,000, if not about $700,000. And this house was anything but modest. It was unbelievable. And that's what I noticed about the show is a place will be shown as off-grid or modest, but it's actually architecturally a wonder. They do these, it's really advanced kind of modernist architecture, and everything is top of the line and just slick, beautiful. Even if built on a budget, they were still extremely expensive homes.
Really, it's about changing the definitions of words. They're trying to change the definition of what modest means, for example. They want people to develop an inferiority complex, I think. That's what it looks like to me.
Absolutely.
And of course, none of the credit card debt was mentioned in the title. It just says
built on a modest salary.
Exactly.
And the guy that built it, based on the jobs he said he had in the entertainment industry, in the background of the entertainment industry, like crew and that kind of stuff. It sounds like, upper middle class salary to just estimate. And the house that he built was definitely way out of his means. So here's how he had to afford it. He actually put a rental unit on the bottom floor and then a tiny little 100 square foot or 120 square foot unit, tiny place in one corner of the house. And for he bought the land in 2008. So for many, many years, I don't know when the house was completed, but let's say for, the last several years, he was renting out the entire house to someone else and living in that little 100 square foot thing to pay off the debts. Now, finally, the episode came out recently. He actually moved into the house. So it took him years to pay off those debts. And meanwhile, he lived in the little closet. Now, I'm not saying that's not a pretty smart idea. What he did is pretty cool, but the debt is not cool. I would be stressed out of my mind with that kind of debt.
Right. And what kind of life is that? What kind of life is that to just slave away for so long and go into that much debt and have that kind of... See, I mentioned earlier, it's about the stress just hanging over you.
Yeah.
That's no way to live. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and this show is very much into opulent houses. Every house on it is pretty opulent. Or if they're not, they're second homes or rental units. It plays on the greed of people who want that upper class lifestyle, but they don't have the money to do it.
Well, either way, it's presenting an unrealistic view of how most people live.
Absolutely. It's funny, just incidentally, there is a lot of programming on these shows. The guy that built the Silver Lake house, he put in only one teeny little patch of grass and for his yoga, just big enough for him to do yoga. And he said grass is a luxury. Now, if he just could drive up the 5 freeway, he lives in Silver Lake, just travel up the 5 north towards Burbank and look at the hillsides and tell me grass is a luxury. It's green as an emerald. So I don't like that kind of programming about water scarcity. I love native plant gardens. I think it's a great idea and it's easier to deal with, but we do not have a scarcity of water. And especially after this last drought-busting winter and spring, right now it's late May. I would say mid to late May, as I would describe it.
Yeah.
It's May 21st.
Yeah, and we're having a protracted winter, which is really quite lovely.
It's freezing. It's going to snow tonight. It snowed the other night. It's not really sticking right now because it drops to 32 and then it warms up to the 40s in the day. It's just incredible, though, and so much rain. We're just getting drenched here in California. So water scarcity, all the scarcity programming is what's behind this agenda.
It's not just scarcity of space and room. It's scarcity of all sorts of things, materials, natural resources. That did not surprise me one bit. We're watching this video and they just kind of stick that in there towards the end.
Of course. And speaking of places we've been gifting, well, because of all this rain, this brings to mind what caused the rain in May. We went to Fresno in April and we did a complete gridding of Fresno and Clovis. And one of the cities featured on this house show on YouTube, on Kirsten Dirksen, was a place was in Clovis. There's a program in Clovis, which is a city that's connected to Fresno, where people can get city grants to put a tiny house on their already owned property. And they have to conform to the city's plan that they have of how they want the new streets to look with these new houses, like on alleys and places where there weren't houses before. They're going for urban density in Clovis. And we just were there gifting. I was really excited to see all that healthy land. It was green and lush. Things are growing. There's good grazing land for cattle and horses. And there's so much land there that I had to ask the question, why Clovis for urban density? It's a tiny little town. It's got a cute downtown, but why cram into Clovis? You can get a piece of land out there. Instead of renting your tiny house, you can rent a house with a lot and grow some food.
I wondered that immediately. And of course, we got our answers. Yes, it is just more of this money for landlords.
And Agenda 21, pack them in, In Clovis, they can't do condos because it's Clovis. It's a little town. Pack them in. Get some tiny houses. Cram them in.
You mentioned psycho backhouse landlords.
Psycho backhouse landlords. There's some more of them for you.
Yeah, exactly. It's just in a slightly different form. Because...
Good luck sticking to that 1-year lease in Clovis because you're going to be made miserable by your nightmare landlord.
They're always trying to get in your business.
Trust
and they're
me.
always going to try and do illegal rent raises. It's one thing after another.
Nothing good can come of living with somebody who put a little house on their property because they want to get money. They look at you as a customer, not even as expendable. They just know they can just, because of the boom, the rents keep going up, they can make your life a nightmare so you voluntarily move out, and then they can charge more rent to the next guy. That's
right.
what they do. That's what they did to us in LA. But yeah, a lot of the show features wealthy people and what they do. Even in Joshua Tree, that is one of my favorite places in the world. It's been totally ruined by LA hipsters. And by LA hipsters, I mean people from the Midwest who moved to LA and then moved to Joshua Tree. Because, this is being ruined by hipsters from everywhere. And
by the way, I just want to say, because I'm from LA too, we're not talking down on the idea of people moving somewhere else. That's fine, but
just stay out of LA.
It's no, I think the problem here is the ethic that these people are bringing. People moving to LA inevitably just...
They're brainwashed. You got to be nuts to move there.
They think they're just going to become actors overnight or rock stars overnight. It doesn't work that way. If you're not a member of the parasitic cloning lab, then you're not going to make it, period. Take it from me and take it from Sharon too. We both tried to do this for years. It doesn't work that way.
Well, we worked as background actors. I wouldn't call that trying to make it. I tried to make it in music, which was a completely flawed concept.
That's what I'm talking about.
It was ridiculous. But anyway, it doesn't make sense to me why people have moved to LA. There really is no appeal to it, in my opinion, other than it's my home, and I'm used to it. It's just home to me. But yeah, in this show, the Joshua Tree house was typical of what's going on in Joshua Tree and places outside of LA where LA people are going because they can't afford LA anymore. Now they're turning those places expensive. And this house was a tiny house in Joshua Tree. It was interesting, but it was an EMF nightmare. The whole thing was computerized. Everything in it was done by an iPad mounted to the wall. And I just know I couldn't live in a thing like that, and it's also not really why we go to Joshua Tree. Places like that are for reconnecting with the earth, being one with the earth, camping, being outdoors, hiking. It's not about an electronic house. It's just too much of this glamorous, expensive, trendy stuff being added to environments that should have been for people who are creative, want to pursue a passion. That's what this comes down to is... Now even the tiny houses for the people who don't have a lot of money are becoming unavailable. This is why there's so many more campsites in LA with homeless people. It's gotten out of control. The homeless problem in LA is through the roof. And actually, we had a show about tiny houses for the homeless in LA about 3 years ago, where this issue was brought up about tiny houses for homeless. That would be a great idea, tiny houses for homeless. But instead, we're now pricing tiny houses to where even working people can't afford them.
Even in 3 years, the homeless problem has skyrocketed out of control.
It is.
Even in just 3 years.
And regular people are homeless. I mean, just people who look normal like you and me. They're dressed nicely. They've got their phones. They're texting. They're doing what people do. And they're sleeping in a tent underneath the overpass at Venice and La Cienega.
So... we've established how big this problem is and how urgent the solution is. So what is to be done about this? I think, first and foremost, just like you said, stop taking loans.
Yep. Don't do it. Boycott it. Wow, what would happen if no one took a loan anymore starting today? This market would crash overnight. Wouldn't that be cool?
Even if 2% of people stop taking loans, the market would crash overnight. It only takes a small amount of people not feeding it. That's the thing. The swindle requires you. It requires your participation. If you don't participate, then it doesn't work. It's just like 5G. I hate to bring that up.
Oh, no, that's good that you bring that up because I still get tons of emails on that. Watch our show, 5G Hysteria, if you're concerned about 5G. We tell you what to do and you won't like the answer because it involves you. But if you want to be involved in your own life, then you will like the answer.
Don't participate.
Exactly. There's a lot more detail on that show, on that issue. But also, what to do about this housing problem? There really is no shame in renting. It's a fine thing to do if you don't have the money to buy a house. It's really actually a lot easier to deal with. Landlords can be a pain in the ass, but there's no shame in renting, and there's also nothing wrong with moving out of that urban environment. It's becoming a lot easier to live outside of cities now. It's something I never would have thought of years ago. It didn't even occur to me not to live in the city. I lived in LA and then I moved to another city. I moved to Portland, Oregon, and I moved back to LA. It didn't even occur to me. If I had my head on my shoulders a few years ago, then I would have, thought to buy a house out in the desert somewhere. But I didn't think that way back then.
Let me put it this way. You're paying a man or a woman who then pays a bank versus just paying a bank directly. What's really the difference?
Well, now, when you bring it up that way, it sounds appealing to pay the bank instead and not have the landlord. But the problem there is you are breaking the law and you are screwing yourself. Just that is what it is. I'm not going to sugarcoat it.
My point is, like we said earlier, you don't own the property.
Right.
Either way.
Either way.
So this at least gives you the freedom where if say you are in a situation where you have a psycho backhouse landlord, you can just drop everything and say, I'm out of here.
You can. So the urban life had its appeal, but I just have gotten a little past the whole walkability, bikeability, having a social life, and satisfying my gastrointestinal desires by living in a city. I can't eat the food anymore. I can't drink the drinks anymore. Everything makes me sick now unless it's organic and fresh because I've become so sensitive. But no, I've just become normal, I should say. I'm not desensitized anymore. I've become normal. I'm so fine with not living in the city now. I don't care about being able to bike and walk to stuff. It's a different lifestyle in the middle of nowhere. You do have to get used to it. But what it allows for is it allows for your creativity, your introspection, learning, studying, getting in touch with the earth. It allows for all of this stuff that you can't do in the city. One, because it's too crazy and it's like a jungle, concrete jungle. And two, because you can't afford that anymore. You have to work constantly to live there. Out here, we pay extremely low rent. It takes an hour to get to Trader Joe's, okay? So it's not convenient, but we don't need to do that. We've got a natural foods co-op up here that provides healthy food. And if we need to go into Trader Joe's, we just schedule it every once in a while and do that. So you just have to adapt to new ways of living, and people are adapting. The fact that we have a natural foods co-op here in the middle of the wilderness is pretty great.
I mean, seriously, what would you rather do? Be one with nature or be one with your smartphone? Actually, maybe I shouldn't say that because I think a lot of people would rather just be one with the smartphone. That's what transhumanism is all about. But that's a whole other episode altogether.
Well, yeah, and then the urban living is promoting that transhumanist agenda. And actually, even seeing this Joshua Tree house that was all electronic and computerized, it's like they're taking that to nature now. We need to just get away from all that stuff and just get back to what's real. And we are glamorizing homes, and that's what these programs are teaching us. And they started programming this back in the mid-2000s during the last boom. One of my favorite TV shows was Small Space, Big Style, and it was all about people making amazing homes out of tiny places of all kinds. And I loved it though, but it's just like at that time I had property. I was in the middle of it. I didn't understand that it was going to go up and down. I didn't know any of that stuff. I happened to sell at the right time and get out of the thing to move back to LA. So I got lucky and got out in time. But yeah, it was just a time period in my life where I was into all that. But now I see the glamorization of the living space is a real problem because not only does it make people feel they have to strive to earn that kind of a space, but also when you're doing it yourself, time is money. The amount of time that I put into fixing my house in Portland, I spent 5 years of my life fixing the one house I lived in, and I didn't even finish completely. And then I had to move. I lost all that time that I could have been learning something important. I guess I learned something important in a different way because I learned a lot about what's going on right now in the world to where I am able to see through the lie and wait it out and be patient, because it's all about patience and earning your way in life.
Yeah, and if you watch any of the videos on this channel, for example, you'll see that there's like six or seven different agendas in there. It's 6 or 7 different scams that they're trying to cram into your head and normalize, and they're all evil and they're all life negating. So the key here is to just don't participate in it.
And when everything goes back to normal, which I think will be within the next couple of years, that would be a great time to get a tiny house. If that's the lifestyle you want and you don't need the space, because what's wonderful about it and the good thing is you can put it anywhere, you can do it anywhere, and you could create a beautiful life for yourself on a very low budget. So when things get back to normal, or if you have the wherewithal to do it yourself now, I say more power to you. And if you don't have the ability to do that now and you don't have the finances, that's pretty normal. That's how we all are right now.
Oh, absolutely.
So just be patient and wait it out. That's what I would advise. That's what I'm doing.
And that's the other thing. Don't just automatically believe everything you hear. Mm-hmm. These shows are trying to portray a version of life that is completely it's a fiction.
It's unrealistic.
It's a fiction, and they're going to try and make you think that you haven't accomplished anything with your life. They're going to make you think that you're poor no matter how much money you get, that you have to take some soul-sucking corporate job. Don't fall for it.
Hey, even if you get a soul-sucking corporate job, you're not going to be able to afford a house in this market. So that just shows you that it's a losing battle, but the battle is not lost forever, because I think it's going to only be a couple more years. I don't know for sure. I can't know this, but I do know one thing is these things go up and down and they don't last. So just be patient like us if you can, and keep renting and cherish your home, because everybody's home is to be cherished.
I agree. And what better way to live than to reestablish your own control over your life and not put it in the hands of some bank? Anyway, I think we've kind of talked about everything we need to talk about here. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Human Frequency. Please come to our website, www.thekembo.com. You can find links to our YouTube channel, our Etsy shop, our blog, and see all of the wonderful things going on in the weather and all of the things that we have planned for the future. Thank you so much for listening. See you again next time.